Bennett arrived in a battered 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle and became the joke of the night. Madison Reed called the single dad a failure in front of everyone and told him to use the service entrance next time. Caleb said nothing. Minutes later, a red Ferrari stopped outside the hotel. Executive Vanessa Cole stepped out, walked straight past the managers, and the crowd handed him a folder and said, "Mr. Bennett, the board is waiting on your signature." Why did a room that had laughed at him suddenly go pale? The operations floor at Westbridge Industries ran on gray carpet, gray partitions, and the sound of printers. Nobody had replaced in 6 years. It sat 2 levels below the executive suites in a tower on the west side of Chicago, and most of the people who worked there measured their careers in badge photos that got older, while the badge number stayed the same. Caleb Bennett had one of those desks. He had one of those badge photos. Nothing about the space suggested he had ever asked for anything more. I was 39, and he wore the same 3 or 4 button-down shirts in rotation. None of them expensive, all of them pressed. He got his own coffee from the machine on the east wall instead of sending an assistant, because he did not have an assistant. He filed his own reports. He answered his own phone. When the building's heating failed in November and half the floor worked in coats for 2 days, he worked in a coat for 2 days and did not complain about it in the group chat like everyone else. People noticed him, the way you notice furniture that has always been in the room. What they remembered when they remembered anything was how calm he was. Not cheerful, not warm exactly. Calm without effort, as if the temperature of a room simply did not reach him. That calm got tested more often than it should have. When a project manager named Dennis Rowe presented a cost reduction model in a quarterly review and never mentioned that Caleb had built the entire framework for it, Caleb sat in the 3rd row and clapped with everyone else. Afterward, in the hallway, Dennis waited for the confrontation with his shoulders already braced. Caleb told him the numbers on slide 7 were off by a rounding error and walked to the elevator. When somebody made a joke at his expense, he let it land and die. When Madison Reed said in front of the whole department that he had no ambition, that some people were simply built to hold a chair down, he did not argue. He did not go quiet in the wounded manner. People go quiet. He kept working, and by the end of the week, nobody could remember whether he had responded at all. That was the part people misread. Silence in an office is a language, and everyone assumed they were fluent in it. A man who does not fight back cannot fight back. A man who does not defend himself has nothing worth defending. The floor arrived at that conclusion slowly and comfortably, the way you arrive at any conclusion that costs you nothing. Madison Reed arrived at it faster than anyone, and she enjoyed it more. She was 31 and had come into Westbridge 3 years earlier with a plan she talked about openly, which was rare in a place where most people hid their plans. She wanted a director's title before she was 35. She dressed for the job above the one she had. She learned the names of every executive assistant on the 22nd floor before she learned the names of the people who sat 10 feet from her. She was good at her work, genuinely good, and she had decided somewhere along the line that being good at her work entitled her to say whatever she wanted about people who were not. Caleb became her favorite subject. She never seemed to plan it. It simply happened whenever he was in range. She would ask loud enough for the row behind her. Why a man closing in on 40 still dressed like a summer hire. She would tell the break room that Caleb probably spent a full month's salary keeping that ancient Chevrolet running, and that there was something almost noble about a man pouring everything he had into a machine that would never be worth anything. She said it with a smile that made it sound like affection, which is what made it work, her best line. the one she reused, because it always got a laugh, was delivered with a coffee cup in her hand, and her eyes never quite reaching him. Some people work their entire lives, she liked to say, and still end up standing exactly where they started. Caleb heard it. He heard all of it. There was a small motion he made when it happened, a slight settling of his shoulders, and then he went back to whatever was on his screen. In all the time she had known him, no one on that floor had ever seen him raise his voice. Nobody could explain why he never reacted. A few people decided he was beaten down. A few decided he was slow. A woman in accounts payable named Grace Whitfield decided he was the only person on that floor who had never once made her feel small. She had been passed over for a senior analyst seat twice in 2 years. Both times without being told why, and she said what she thought of Caleb exactly once to no effect at all. Nobody asked the more interesting question, which was what a man has to know about his own position before other people's opinions of it stop mattering. Nothing in Caleb Bennett's file suggested there was anything to know. He was listed as operations. He was a single father who lived on the north side. He drove a car older than most of the building, and he had driven it since long before any of them met him, which meant it was the one thing in his life he had never traded upward. That was all anyone had, and nobody went looking for more. The announcement went out on the first Monday of December, and it went out from Preston Hale's office, which told everyone it mattered. Westbridge Industries would hold its year-end celebration at the Corbin Hotel, downtown ballroom-level black tie. The largest event the company had staged in 9 years. There would be a full bar, a string quartet, and valet service at the north entrance. Attendance for the operations and strategy divisions was described as strongly encouraged, which in that building meant mandatory. The second paragraph was the one people read twice. Leadership would use the evening to outline the coming restructuring and to announce several new management appointments. The floor changed within an hour. People who had spent the year avoiding each other started scheduling coffee. 2 men from strategy began sending calendar invites to executives who had never answered them before. The restructure had been rumored since August, all was in the abstract, and now it had a date and a dress code. Madison Reed treated the announcement like a starting gun. She had been told twice by people close enough to Preston Hale to be worth believing that the restructuring would create a director's seat over the combined operations and delivery groups. She had run the numbers on her own performance and found them excellent. She had a dress selected within 36 hours, black cut sharp at the shoulder from a designer she made sure to mention by name at least once a day for the following week. She arranged a car too, a leased sedan, she referred to in conversation as her car, and she began a campaign of small, visible conversations with senior people in hallways and elevators. None of it was subtle. Subtlety was not the point. The point was that by the night of the party, everyone who mattered would already associate her face with the word director. She talked about the evening constantly, and because she talked about it constantly, she eventually talked about who else was going. She found out. Caleb was attending on a Thursday afternoon from the sign-in sheet, and she looked at it for a moment before she turned around with the expression of someone who had just been handed a gift. "You're going," she said to him, holding the sheet up so the desks around them could see. "To the Corbin." Caleb kept typing. "I am." She leaned against the partition beside his monitor. There were 4 or 5 people with easy hearing distance, and she waited for them to look up before she continued, because a line delivered to one person is only a comment. "Then do yourself a favor," she said. "Rent something decent for the night. There will be board members at that hotel. Don't pull that rolling museum of yours up in front of leadership." A man 2 desks over laughed into his hand. Someone else looked at the ceiling. Caleb stopped typing then, and he turned in his chair to face her fully, which he almost never did. Whatever people were expecting it did not arrive. "I like my car," he said. Madison laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded and delighted, the laugh of a person who has just confirmed something she already believed. She told him that was exactly the problem, and she said it kindly, and she walked back to her desk, still smiling. Caleb turned back to his screen. Across the aisle, Grace Whitfield watched the whole thing and said nothing because saying something had not worked the first time. The Corbin Hotel had a portico wide enough for 3 vehicles and a doorman who had worked there 19 years and had stopped being impressed by anything sometime around the 2nd year. By 7:40, the line of arrivals had settled into a rhythm. A silver Mercedes. A Porsche in a green. Dark, it read black under the lights. 2 Bentleys within 4 minutes of each other, which caused a small delay, while the valet team sorted out who was blocking whom. Guests stepped out under the heat lamps, and the ballroom filled with the specific sound of 200 people who all wanted to be seen arriving. Madison arrived at 7:50. She had timed it deliberately late enough that the room was full early enough that leadership had not yet retreated into their private circles. She spent the first 20 minutes moving through the floor like a woman working a room she already owned. At 8:05, the Chevrolet came up Wabash and turned into the portico. It was a 1969 Chevelle dark green with a hood that had been repainted at least once and a driver's side mirror that did not quite match the body. The engine was loud in the way. Old engines are loud, not aggressive, just present, and it filled the space under the portico roof for a full 4 seconds before it shut off. 2 women in the entry line turned around. The doorman looked up from his podium. Inside the lobby near the glass, Madison saw it and set her drink down. She did not simply watch. She turned and gathered people, 2 women from strategy and a man from finance. And she pointed through the window with the enthusiasm of someone showing friends a comet. Caleb got out. He wore a dark suit, well cut and plain. No pocket square, no watch that anyone could see. He closed the door with the particular care of a man who knew that door needed care. "That is the car," Madison said. Her voice carried out through the entry doors, which were open for the arrivals. "That is genuinely the car. I want you to understand that my dress cost more than that vehicle. I am not exaggerating for effect. My dress." The man from finance laughed. One of the women from strategy laughed, and then looked slightly uncomfortable about it, and then laughed again, because the first laugh had already committed her. The valet came around the front of the Chevelle. He was young, maybe 23, and he had spent the last hour parking German sedans. He looked at the car, then at the man standing beside it, and he made the calculation that people in his position make 40 times a night. "Sir, service and vendor access is around the side," he said, pointing east. "Loading entrance takes you straight to the kitchen level." Caleb did not correct him immediately. He looked toward where the young man was pointing, as though he were genuinely considering the route. Madison was already moving. She came out through the doors into the cold, holding the hem of her dress off the pavement, and she stopped 6 feet from him, with her face lit up. "You heard the man, Caleb." She said it loudly, and there were now perhaps 15 people in earshot. Some of them Westbridge employees, and some of them not. Service entrance. Somebody in this city finally knows where you belong. The laughter that followed was not universal, and it was not comfortable. A few people laughed. More of them looked away and pretended to check their phones, which is its own kind of participation. The valet realized something had gone wrong, and his face changed. He started to apologize. Caleb stopped him with a small shake of the head. "You didn't do anything," he told him. Then he stood there for a moment in the cold, under the heat lamps, with his hand still resting on the roof of the Chevelle. There were two ways out of that moment, and both of them were open. He could get back in the keys were in his hand. The engine was still warm, and nobody in that lobby would have been surprised. By Monday, the story would have been that he could not take a joke. That version had a certain comfort to it. He would not have to walk into a room where the temperature had already been set against him. Or he could go in. He looked at Madison for a few seconds. It was not a glare. There was no heat in it at all, and that was the strange part, the woman from strategy would think about later, without being able to say why. He looked at her the way a man looks at a document he intends to read all the way through. Then he turned and handed the keys to the valet. "It sticks in second when it's cold," Caleb said. "Don't force it. It'll go." The young man took the keys carefully. "Yes, sir." Caleb buttoned his jacket and walked past Madison, past the doorman, through the glass and into the ballroom of the Corbin Hotel, where 200 people from Westbridge Industries were drinking champagne and waiting to find out who was going up and who was going away. Behind him, the Chevelle turned over on the first try and rolled down the ramp into the garage. The ballroom of the Corbin was warm and gold-lit, with round tables along the walls and a cleared floor in the center where the string quartet played under a ceiling of hanging glass. 200 people from Westbridge Industries moved through it in a slow current, and the current had a direction, which was toward the corner where the executives had gathered. Caleb took a glass of water from a passing tray and stood near the eastern columns close enough to the room to be part of it, and far enough back to see all of it at once. He spent a few minutes with a logistics supervisor named Walter Boyd, talking about a warehouse lease that was up for renewal in March. He nodded at Grace Whitfield, who had come alone, and looked like she wanted to leave already. He did not move toward the executives. Madison did. She had recovered from the cold of the portico and re-entered the room with the story already forming. And within 20 minutes, half the ballroom knew that Caleb Bennett had arrived in a car older than most of the guests and had been mistaken for a vendor. The story would have died on its own. She did not let it. She found him near the columns just before 9, with a group of 3 managers. She had been circling all evening, and she brought them over like a host presenting an exhibit. "You have to meet Caleb," she said. "Caleb has been in operation since before I was hired. He is proof that this company is truly deeply loyal to its long-serving people." There was a beat while the sentence landed, and then 2 of the managers laughed. The third, a heavy-set man from procurement, smiled without committing to it. Caleb shook their hands. He asked the procurement manager a specific question about a supplier contract coming up for renewal, and the man answered it. And for about 90 seconds, the conversation was an ordinary conversation between adults. Madison steered it back. She always did. She mentioned the Chevelle again. Then the valet, then made a remark about how some people build careers and some people build hobbies. And the group broke apart shortly afterward with the vague discomfort of people who had enjoyed something they would not have wanted recorded. Preston Hale watched the entire exchange from 12 feet away. I was 54 silver at the Temples, and he had run the operations and strategy divisions for 6 years on a philosophy he stated openly at every town hall, which was that Westbridge rewarded performance and nothing else. He had a glass of scotch in his hand and a clear view of Madison working the group. He did not intervene. He did not frown. When Madison caught his eye afterward, he lifted his glass an inch, and she read that gesture correctly because it was meant to be read. Later near the bar, she said something that carried further than she intended. She was talking to the 2 women from strategy about the evening, about the guest list, and she said that events like this one were really for people who were moving upward. and that it was a little sad. When the company invited everyone because it forced certain people to spend a night pretending they belonged in the room, Preston was 4 feet away. He heard it. He smiled into his drink and turned back to his conversation. Caleb, standing by the columns with the same untouched glass of water, heard it too. He did not react, and by now the absence of reaction had stopped reading as restraint to anyone watching. It read as confirmation. Madison had spent 3 years telling a room that this man had nothing in him, and the room had spent an entire evening watching him prove it by standing very still. So she went further, because there was nothing to stop her. She started making comparisons out loud. She pointed out a man from strategy who had joined 2 years after Caleb, and now ran a team of 14. She mentioned a woman who had transferred out of operations and was in the Denver office with a title. She built a small architecture of examples, and the Chevelle sat at the bottom of it as the illustration. "That car isn't a car," she told a group near the dessert table loudly enough that the columns could hear it. "It's a resume. It's the resume of a failure, and he parks it out front like he's proud of it." At 9:40, the quartet stopped, and Preston Hale walked up onto the low stage at the north end of the ballroom. He spoke for 11 minutes. He thanked people. He named 3 divisions that had beaten their targets and did not name operations, which several people noticed. Then he came to the part everyone had been waiting for, and his voice dropped into the register menus. "When they want a sentence remembered, Westbridge," he said, was entering a new phase. The restructuring would be finalized within the week. The company was going to become faster, leaner, and more demanding, and he wanted to be honest with everyone in the room about what that meant. There would be people who could adapt to that, and there would be people who could not, and the ones who could not were going to be left behind. He said it was not a threat. He said it was a courtesy. The applause was solid and slightly nervous. On the floor, Madison found Caleb across the room and smiled at him, and she held it long enough to be certain he had seen it. Then she moved toward the columns with a fresh glass and a loose ring of maybe 20